Everyone, please remember to mark yourselves as present in the notes. Craig is very present as usual.
I thought that was C. Rob's Zoom profile picture.
Why not?
Hey, Crow, first, congrats on getting elected to the TAC.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Brand wizard
with a hat like that.
Advisory
Mm-hmm.
committee.
Keeps all the conspiracies out.
Now we just have to guess what he's thinking. We can't just read it off the dial.
There's some who call me Tim.
Tim?
And we'll give it another minute.
Is John on? I don't see him. Yeah.
He is probably unable to come today. There's apparently something going on at his place. So I'm just going to mark him as apologies.
Okay, because I saw him on Slack, but maybe something going on.
He told me that, stuff and things as sometimes happen to all of us. So all right. Oh no, we still got another minute or two, I think, before we can kick off. But it's exciting to see so many faces this week, considering that it's technically cloud native, although I always think of it as KubeCon this week, I think in the EU.
That was last week.
Yeah. Last week? All right. Everyone's just going to hang over is my assumption. I'm not as good at keeping track of KubeCon since I sort of moved out of the cloud native vending universe.
Don't worry, we're really tired still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, 18,000 people at the same time will do that to you.
Yeah, and I barely met them all.
There'll be a quiz. All right, so I'll just pop the notes back in the chat again. If you haven't marked yourself as present, please do that. Let's kick off the agenda to start with. The first question is always, who's going to be the scribe? And it can't be me today because I'm the talking head. Oh, one at a time. I see Abhishek volunteering. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So to begin with, our first thing is, who would like to introduce themselves? Perhaps you've been here before and you haven't seen us for a while, or perhaps you're brand new and you'd like to introduce yourself. Here's your opportunity.
Yes, I would like to take the liberty to very proudly introduce Jay Benfield from New York Presbyterian. I think this is Jay's first meeting. We've been recruiting him, and I'll offer from my personal experience that not only has New York Presbyterian done some great work in contributing with Daggerboard around SBOMs, but they're about the most forward-leaning healthcare institution in the entire United States that I know of, next to maybe trying Graphite Health, which is trying but not there yet, to be involved in open source. So I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, Jay.
Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Jim, for the kind words. Really, really appreciate that. And good morning, everyone. Great to be here.
I'll tell my surgeon that I'm going to defect to Presbyterian. Awesome. That's fantastic. It's great to see new faces. Who else would like to introduce themselves, if any?
Yeah, I'll jump in because I think this is the first time I've been at this particular meeting. So I'm Chris. I'm from IBM Cloud Object Storage. Also a delegate for IBM at TC39 and at the CSS Working Group. So hello.
Wow, that's quite a spectrum.
I also am an open source maintainer and contributor. Since this is the OpenSSF, should mention that.
We're all friends here. Anyone else feel like introducing themselves today? Okay. That being said, I think we've got a membership update, I assume, from Alan.
Oh, is that for me, Jacques? Sorry.
I don't know. Just seeing membership update. I don't know whether that's actually meant to be a reminder for folks to add themselves on the list, or whether it's general.
It is a reminder for folks. Can you please, at the top of the Slack channel, there is the spreadsheet that's embedded there. I think I have the permissions correct. After last week now, people should be able to get in and edit. I've seen a few people have. What we're looking for is, please put your own names on the second tab, trying to build a list of who are active members here. And then if you have any referrals, we are looking for, and it's wonderful to have Jay representing another highly regulated industry. We are looking for a more diverse crowd of end users, more in healthcare, retail, transportation, anywhere. So if you have some referrals or some folks you think you can reach out or would like us to reach out to, please put those in the first tab. All right, so that's just a general reminder.
Yeah, we're very keen to broaden the base, across geographies, across levels of regulation, across industry sectors, and across public, private, academic, etc. Just to get the best representation we can.
The second tab is for current OpenSSF members. Was that, or what was the?
You don't have to be an OpenSSF member. Obviously, we'd like you to be an OpenSSF member, but there is no requirement. You can join. You can join the working group.
Yeah. Well, we are, so that's fine. I'm just wondering, like if I should put ourselves in there in the second tab, the current one. Yeah.
Right. Yes, please do. Absolutely, please do.
Okay, next on the agenda, I've got a note here for LF North America Summit. I'm not sure who added this.
I guess maybe I should put my initials after some of the agenda items I add. I'll do that next time, Jacques.
No worries.
Yeah, so obviously LF Summit is coming up in a couple of weeks. Two things here. One is want to find out who is going from this group, or if they know from their organization is going. We had talked about hosting a birds of a feather session, a meetup at one of the local watering establishments in the evening, or carving out some time during when there may be some downtime between sessions and evening activities, just to get together, connect in person. So it'd be good to add yourself to this list, to the notes here, if you are planning on going. The other item is that Jonathan Meadows and I do have a presentation there. The trials and tribulations of end users in open source software supply chain security. That's not the full title, that's the gist. And so what I wanted to put forth here is, what we want to do is talk about a couple of things. One, what's going on in this segment, what's going on that are the highest profile issues for end users. There's going to be a whole bunch of presentations that represent the producer or the developer of software. We really just want to focus on the end user because that's what we're doing right now, right? So what are the biggest issues to end users? We have 25 minutes. We want to highlight them, and then we want to spend a few minutes on what is this working group doing to address the main concerns of end users, right? So want to get that out, you can Slack us, you can put them in the notes here. We can spend a few minutes talking about it, like what are the highest profile issues that we should be bringing up to this audience. Is it regulation? Are there technical issues that we want to highlight? A combination of both. So I'll let that out there. Okay, I guess there's no reason for an end user working group.
That was quick. We've done it.
We'll certainly talk about regulations.
if I could spur the conversation, I spent the last 2 days in an all-hands session with the healthcare sector, and we were working on the strategic plan and areas of concern. And for us, medical devices, software, SBOMs, the relationship between device vendors and their customers, how the customers can use the information. The challenge where you have multiple vendors in a facility, and this is one of the things Daggerboard is trying to address, is maybe perhaps you're in a theoretical world where every vendor is compliant, they're providing an SBOM, they're keeping it up to date. How the end users are able to use all of that information for a supply chain risk management, analytics or understanding is still very much a challenge. And of course, there are also challenges internal with those vendors with coming up with their SBOMs and how they're keeping them up to date. So the dynamics in moving from just the static SBOM concept into real supply chain risk management and asset risk visibility on the part of the end user is a challenge, I think.
Okay, that's a great topic. Supply chain is obviously a huge and evolving issue. So SBOMs are a piece of that. Was in a conversation with a client yesterday, and their main concern was the validity of the information in the SBOM. Right, that was a hot topic for them. They do a lot of business with a lot of startups, and they consume a lot of software from startups, and they have no idea if the SBOM that they're getting is actually accurate or current. And there's little ways to, and we're really not at the place where attestations are either provided or accurate. Right.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, from the security officer perspective, it's always easy just not to trust the vendor and say, I don't think they're giving me the best thing they can. What we got for feedback from like medical devices was also on the vendor side, with larger companies and more complex engineering and development processes, they want to try and provide the customer with the most up-to-date SBOM, software detailed information. But there are just challenges within their own organization. And, they threw out things as an example where they're trying to put together a cardiology device. One piece of software still runs on Windows NT or XP or something like that. How do they work around that from an engineering perspective to still deliver a device that helps a cardiologist save somebody's life, while at the same time acknowledging the cyber risks of the underlying, engineering infrastructure?
Yeah, I think there's a general hesitancy still on the part of vendors and medical device manufacturers to expose some of that dirty laundry. We encounter some resistance still. Our vulnerability team, for example, encounters some resistance still with just SBOM collection and kind of navigating that process today. We have taken some strides as an organization. Recently, we implemented some minimum security standards that we've published openly. We've shared actually on our website that dictate a lot of really good stuff. SBOM has not been incorporated into those standards yet, but there's plans for doing. It really lays out expectations of the vendors that we're working with and manufacturers, OEMs, in terms of how we do business and what we expect in terms of the software and the systems coming into the environment.
Crib, I see you have your hand up.
I do. I have two topics that this group may want to discuss as part of what Andrew's laying out. Adjacent to Jim's statement, I had the great pleasure this week to attend the CERT-CC vendor meeting, which is an annual secret cabal that gets together every year at RSA, and all the vendors sit in a room and talk about all you customers and whatnot. Not really. But a large point of discussion was the integration of SBOMs, advisories through things like CSAF, and then OpenVex and VEX. So this group may be interested in, you probably don't have this problem yet, but it is conceivable in the future you will have multiple hundreds of SBOMs provided to you from your suppliers. Then you will have potentially thousands of advisories around all those different things. And then the new hotness is Vex, which is a way for a developer or supplier to kind of state the effectiveness of a component to a vulnerability. So it might be interesting to start this group thinking about how you're going to integrate all of this information, and do you have the capability to ingest all of these things and start to do your risk assessments and evaluations on kind of your next steps as you're getting just flooded with information, and you'll probably need some robots to help you review all that. So that was one topic this group might want to chat about, Andrew. And then the other topic, one of the other hats I get to wear at the foundation is I sit on the public policy committee. And we had an exciting dialogue all about the EU's CRA legislation that's coming down the pipe. And that might be something that everybody here cares about, whether you live or do business in the EU, or B, get some type of software or hardware from a vendor within the EU. This has some potentially very widespread and catastrophic is not the right word, but a very large potential impact to consumers. And those are two interesting topics you might want to talk about. Jacques.
Yeah, I might double down on the CRA. I have raised it internally with government affairs folks. And the scenario I give is I consider to be low probability, but very high impact would be if rubygems.org gets locked out of the EU because it can't meet the distributor requirements. Suddenly we can't deploy in the EU. And because of data residency laws, that means we can't do business in the EU, which is bad news for everybody. If any package repository gets locked out of the EU, you're in a world of hurt. Similarly, if authors in the EU suddenly get cold feet about developing open source software because they're afraid of being considered manufacturers, again, suddenly a lot of your dependencies are not getting updated. Nobody's attending to the PRs. The security holes are just sitting there because nobody wants to touch it. It's become toxic. That would be extremely disruptive on a longer time scale. So I encourage all of you to talk to your government affairs folks if you have them, and encourage them to wade in. I know that a lot of companies already have taken a position on the CRA, but it tends to be formed around the commercial operations rather than what you might think of as the IT operations, which is the perspective I come at it from. So definitely take another look if you haven't. And Joshua points out, if you're in the EU, yes, you can talk to MEPs, and I've encouraged our government affairs folks to reach out for us.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be one of the main topics right there. And not just the CRA, but also what's going on with US legislation, giving a summary and update. So I'll put together a draft of the deck. I started a draft of the deck. I'll actually send it to the group for review. Definitely would like input and feedback. Again, we only have 25 minutes, and I want to reserve a little bit of that for questions. I want to reserve some of that to pitch and not pitch the OpenSSF, right? It's not a sales pitch, but I do want to say who we are, what we're doing. Come and join us and spend a few minutes on that. So I'm really looking at about, and I'm going to do this in a kind of a semi-interview format with John. So we'll have about 15 minutes of kind of presentation and then other activities. So other content. So we have to be really crisp, and I want to get it down to just like the top 5 things that we can spend a couple minutes on each. But certainly the CRA, SBOMs, and integrate and the supply chain issues certainly are up there. But really want any other feedback from the group. Please contribute.
Yeah, I threw in the chat about maybe doing a webinar, or I'd be happy to connect us with, there's a couple US federal associations, industry associations that bring together both government representatives as well as government vendors in the technology space. I participate very heavily in one, and they're always focused on zero trust and identity and cloud security and AI and quantum. And we don't really have a SBOM secure software attestation effort yet, but with the link I put in the chat about what the Office of Management and Budget is now going to insist that agencies do, it's probably an area to spin up, and then collaboration between this working group and that association working group could be a useful way to build the message specific to the federal government environment.
Okay.
That's all I got today.
That's great. So Jacques, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to that session. I'm looking forward to that conference in general. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm also going to be attending the OpenSSF Day. I hope folks will be able to do that, as that schedule looks very interesting too. So now we come to the catch-all section of the agenda, which is the any other business, or AOB. So if there's something that you have a burning need to discuss that we haven't had a chance to get to, or that you feel that we've failed to see or overlooked, that's the word I was looking for, now's your chance to pop your hand up and let us know what you'd like to discuss. This is where I would have brought up the CRA, but we already touched on it. It seems like everybody's discussed everything they'd like to discuss. Last call. Excellent. Crow?
Fun fact, the last year, the foundation put out a document called the Mobilization Plan, and there's been some effort around that over the last year. Last December, the governing board also wanted to highlight a slightly different direction for the foundation. So they've dubbed this concept the Sterling Tool Chain. And we've had a lot of conversation. Well, we've had some conversation at like a GB TAC level with some people being involved in that conversation. And Jonathan and I had talked a lot about the Sterling Tool Chain. And I think it would be very useful to get the end user perspective on trying to help develop a set of requirements for what that might look like. So I would invite everybody to take a peek. I have a TAC issue, and there is a associated document that goes along with that. So if you have any thoughts about, from an end user perspective, what you'd like to see the foundation kind of produce or endorse or encourage, please review that, either make a comment in the TAC issue or comment directly on the attached Google document, so we can talk about the future direction of how we're going to help try to secure the open source supply chain for the world.
Go.
I'll add to that. Oh, go ahead, Andrew, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, Grub, I'm not sure how many people really understand what the Sterling Tool Chain is. It might be worth spending 2 or 3 minutes on the concept.
Sure. Let me find my notes on the topic. So the idea behind the Sterling Tool Chain is trying to accelerate the value and the security that we are working with the community for all, but for both maintainers and consumers of open source. So we're trying to improve the security posture overall. And the idea is to, well, first off, it's a bit of a fishing expedition, but where there isn't a concrete ask of we want to make a widget to do widgety things. But the idea, we're trying to collect ideas about what the Sterling Tool Chain could be. And the idea is to kind of look at an end-to-end software supply chain and figure out how we can implement either new tools or new practices to produce more information, like we touched on a little bit earlier, where some people don't trust their vendors, well, how can we improve the trust in the supply chain? So what types of signals can we release so that when a developer does a scan, maybe that gets recorded and put up into a dashboard somewhere, or when somebody is plugged into scorecards, that's an easy way for an external observer to kind of view some set security criteria and make their own risk assessments based off of that. So the idea behind the tool chain is to try to find these areas where we can increase that communication wherever we can, potentially find, either develop or find a set of applicable tools for open source to leverage and consumers to leverage. And really, it's been a bunch of people trying to hammer on this idea of this very secure, very disciplined, very well managed software supply chain, and how can we execute on that. And again, there's a lot of thoughts on what this could be, and we're just looking for feedback. And I think that end users has been a group that hasn't necessarily had their chance to express their opinion on what they would like to see OpenSSF focused projects or work or funds towards. Jacques.
I took a look, and about a week ago, I think I took a look at the document, and my main conclusion was that I didn't have a conclusion about what it is. The title is very suggestive, tool chain. It sounds very much like picking particular technologies and wiring them together in a particular default configuration. But the document itself sort of skitters towards and bounces away multiple times from that possibility. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I don't know. I'm mostly concerned that the OpenSSF does not invest its funds in a lot of development work. That's expensive. And to be frank, the vendors can do it. Like they've got the folks on the bench to do it. They've got the funds to do it, and they can profit from it if they're canny and market well. Whereas I see the OpenSSF's points of highest leverage with things that fall between the gaps between vendors and end users. End users are busy doing their business, selling their tractors, fixing people's hearts, building planes, and so on. Vendors are busy building software and services and selling those to the end users. What's missing is the stuff in the middle, which is, the stuff that everybody knows that we want, for which we have a collective need, but for which no individual party is the rational actor to actually go and do it for everybody. So, for example, the education sake, where we're looking at,
heard of it.
Where we're looking at, increasing our educational outreach. I see that as something that doesn't really fit in anybody's bucket, so it fits in the OpenSSF bucket. I also had a proposal last year, which we put to the side for the moment, which was the shared help desk, right? Like, it's not sexy running a help desk, but it has high leverage. Those are the sorts of things where I'm concerned that funding for a development effort would compete too well, given the cost of engineering talent. And I see that I've sparked a discussion.
And before I hop to the others, it doesn't necessarily need to be a tool or set of tools, although that is an option. A lot of the work that this group is doing around the reference architecture and the threat modeling. So Henrik and Pierre Giorgio and that crew, we're working on a reference architecture that definitely could play into it and as a template for a consumer to adopt. And here's kind of threats you need to avoid and how to mitigate them. But I'll hush up and let the group talk.
I believe first was Jim.
Myself, I thought, I'm sorry, Jacques. I thought Jacques' commentary was excellent, and back to what I was saying before, to kind of reiterate that you could have an array of software vendors, be they medical devices, be they any other devices. It could be automotive, healthcare, government, etc. And the end user is like, okay, I'm presented with this array of software supply chain information. What do I do with it? And I think, not to get into a controversial area, but I'm sure people are aware that there has been some creative tensions between SPDX and Cyclone DX, specifically around the fact that ServiceNow rightfully wanted to kind of build this into what they're offering for their customers to understand their environment. I don't think we have an across-the-board comprehensive open source approach to doing that, to give individuals, as I think I mentioned before, asset risk or software risk visibility that ties into excuse me, the security dashboard look, or something else that says I have to comply with this NIST control. I'm getting the feedback from this SBOM that this device is not complying with it, or I'm starting to use OSCAL in my cloud environment, and so forth and so on. You know, how do I dynamically get those metrics?
Next on my screen is Dan.
Hey. Yeah, it shouldn't be surprising to know that, or to learn that Sneak is kind of not really, you know, positive on OpenSSF developing a completely comprehensive set of tools. I think our view on the Sterling toolchain thing, though, is that it should be, and this is something that I've been saying to whoever will listen to me, is that the nuance here is about commodity functions, things like a scorecard, for instance, which are amazing and should be developed in a collective spirit, and then in a way where it can be used as a library, or data from scorecard can be used in other people's applications, OpenSSF members and people who are not affiliated with OpenSSF collectively, so that we can level up the industry. So we would like to see more effort. Like, we would like to see the energy that is Sterling toolchain kind of funneled in that direction, where the tools we're talking about are libraries that can help level up everyone and kind of all boats rise kind of way. Yeah. And also, I just wanted to ask Krob if the voices in your head have stopped because of your hat there, or is that?
They're actually reflecting around a lot more.
Oh, all right, okay.
All the outside voices are quiet.
Speaking of voices, Randall, I see your hand up. Who's next?
Yeah, this probably has come up before, Crow, but as I'm going through the document, as you know, there has just been a lot of talk around the community about how OpenSSF, like, certain outreach hasn't been taken positively. So I wonder how that would fit, or how all of this would update that, if you get what I'm saying.
That's an excellent point. And again,
and let me also say this, Crow, I have recently been interacting with a different group of people, because as you know, my position at LF is kind of been growing. And like, the kernel people don't have a very positive impression about what OpenSSF is.
Aw, Greg is the rosiest person I ever met. He always has nice things to say.
So, I stay impartial, but I like to, but yeah.
And that's my personal caution around the idea of creating a bunch of tools, is we don't want to be seen as kingmakers, so to speak. I think there's a lot of choices, and based out of the end users here on this call, I imagine that we could very easily come up with, everyone would have a list of their tools they use today, and it'll be very difficult to have any kind of single tool that's going to work effectively across all these customers. Is there a static analysis tool for Emacs if you're developing?
Well, let me say this. I did get good feedback. They think that we are not sensitive to the fact that there are several generations of security, where security has been defined differently and at different periods of time. So they think that a lot of the work we do is insensitive to that, because it forces people to think about security the way we think about security. And I mean, I don't know if that's a great take, but there might be a slight point to that. So I just want to point that out.
Yes, and we all should be aware that security continually evolves. The threat landscape, everyone here that represents an enterprise, you are constantly barraged by a stream of attacks and threats. So you have to constantly adapt. But yes, I understand there is a need to be empathetic and find ways to translate between the different generations, so to speak, of these different implementations of security. But yeah, I would say if you have strong feelings, please note it in either the issue or the Google document so that your opinion gets expressed, so that as the group moves forward to develop this, we can kind of account for that, those perspectives and requirements.
So I can circulate the Google Doc?
It is in the TAC issue, which is publicly viewable.
I'll pass it along.
Jeffrey?
So my question, given these comments, is the whole notion of Sterling toolchain dead on arrival?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. The governing board thinks it's great. The people that are trying to implement it are having a vigorous debate and dialogue about how we could execute on that vision. And again, all feedback is welcome. If people have ideas of how this could be forged into something that is actionable and useful, please give us that feedback so we can help try to achieve our goal of improving security.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Jeffrey's thoughts.
Yes, I see Jeffrey's hand.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I was just going to affirm some of the points that Randall just brought up relative to looking at this from a multi-generational, multi-perspective point of view, because we tend in the tech industry to latch on to the latest shiny object that's new and hey, cool. But looking at the security issue from a more rounded perspective, I think will be helpful, because I think certainly, especially from an end user perspective, if you've got a bunch of existing infrastructure that's been relatively secure and you want to keep it secure, the idea of memory safe, let's just rewrite everything in Rust because C and C++ is just bad. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. It's a huge trade-off. And in many respects, you're trading one challenge for another, even when you do that, because it's kind of a bit of whack-a-mole, really, honestly. So I'd hate for us as an organization to suddenly put up some scoreboard that says, ooh, if your code's not written in Rust, that's a minus or a red square in the box, because that's not necessarily the case. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to share perspective on the Sterling toolchain is I agree with Jacques' point of view that, there's no reason that the OpenSSF necessarily needs to, go in the direction of trying to develop something that specifically competes with the vendor community. But how do we leverage the past learnings of other major initiatives so that, we can do something in that space that helps move the industry forward? Because there are problems, not just gap areas, but fundamental things where this could help, because the vast majority of open source developers don't necessarily depend on vendor tools.
And my personal feeling is that if we just create a tool that's not going to be successful, the approach we should take should be a blended one of integrating people, process, and technology. It shouldn't just be a one tool to rule them all, but that's my opinion. I think Jay has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so and thanks for the segue, Crow, because I was about to say the same thing. Perhaps the Sterling toolchain, and Crow said this earlier, and I side with him, and perhaps it's not a set on a complete set of tools per se, but maybe it's a combination of people, process, and technology. What I'll also say is this, and I would implore everybody to think about this angle of it, right? As Crow said before, the governing board is gung-ho about a Sterling toolchain. you know, part of what we do in the OpenSSF, and I'll come right out and say it. We all are volunteers, and we're trying to do great work in the industry, but we all are representatives of the organizations that we work for, and the organizations that we work for happen to put our bosses on the governing board in some instances, not all, but in some instances, our bosses are sitting on this governing board. So we have to be careful. If they're gung-ho about it, I think what might be beneficial for us, if we have an issue, if we do think it should go in a specific direction, here in the end users group, which I think is a great place to do it, right? So I echo the sentiment, because we're the individuals that are going to, you know, be advocating for whatever happens. You know, go internally, have these internal discussions, you know, get the buy-in necessary that can go before the governing board. So maybe the influence on the governing board sways a bit, right? And I mean, you might want to do this, go from the outside in rather than from the inside out on this one, just so that you're not, you know, on these recorded calls, we're not directly conflicting with our overlords, you know, in the governing board that also serve as our hierarchy in our respective organizations. So I'll say that there. I mean, as a recap, I'm with Krob on this one. Could be a combination of things. We can talk about that all day long, but let's make sure that whatever we come up with, we're going internal, having the discussions, getting the buy-in, building the rationale, so that when the governing board meets, the rationale is echoed in the governing board, and that way that direction could come back down, so that we're all on the same sheet of music. I'll stop there.
I'll preempt Jim. I'm sorry, Jim. Not all of us are on the governing board. Some of us are ordinary members. Having sort of traded off, you know, made thoughts about the trade-off about where to apply our energy, whether we apply that in time or treasure, so to speak. But I do take your point for those folks who are able to talk to their governing board representatives to find out what their thinking is and to see whether it can be adapted. I think that's helpful. I do worry about what feels like a disconnection between the working groups at one end of the organization and the governing board at the other end of the organization. They don't seem necessarily to be on the same page a lot of the time, or aware of what each other's doing. The fact that Krob had to come in here today and talk about something that's been bubbling in the background for months, in my understanding, since last year, I think, is itself, you know, a symptom. Having made that little speech, I'm going to hand it to Jim.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I was just going to follow up both on Jay's excellent comments and Jeffrey's. And Ed, yeah, there's in every Linux Foundation project, in my opinion, there's what I'll call dynamic tensions between the board companies, who those representatives are. But to kind of encapsulate it for, I think, for this working group, there is a growing regulatory tsunami that started with the executive order, now embodied in things like what OMB has put out, what the CRA says in the EU, and from medical device side, what I think it's the MDR or something like that, which basically is applying GDPR at the medical device level. These things are building. There is no longer a tolerance for these conversations around software vulnerability. And Jeffrey made a great point when he talked about, hey, just because the newest and hottest thing is Rust doesn't mean you're going to re-engineer all of your C++ libraries. You know, for the folks who have been involved in security assessments and vulnerability scans and pen tests before, you always come up with this list of things that are considered critical on an NVD score. But, you know, the reality is I'm not going to fix that, or that's someplace else. And that's when you have visibility to that vulnerability and then say, well, I've offset it or mitigated with this control. The problem we have right now is just not knowing what those are. So it isn't necessarily an advocacy for rewriting libraries so much as just giving visibility to how those vulnerabilities are managed, which is what these various regulatory directives are steering organizations to do. So I think it behooves us, and it is an opportunity. And I think it was Crow that mentioned about not wanting to be kingmakers. There is an opportunity to be something of a kingmaker in the absence of any other guidance, where right now, essentially on almost a global basis, we're sitting around kind of saying, gee, what are we all going to do about this? Well, it'll be forced on us, and it'll be forced on us in ways we may not like if organizations such as this one, which I think are empowered to do so, don't come up with things to offer. Just a thought.
And I posted a larger version of one of the diagrams at the bottom that is a way that touches on the different elements that exist within the foundation today and speaks to a possible way to do like a gap assessment of where we may be lacking. And that's an approach that this could take.
And 10 more seconds on that, because Crow mentioned, of course, our mobilization plan. I was involved with Brian and the teams at OpenSSF where we put together those various mobilization streams, and they were built around the fact that we knew we had an audience with the White House to be able to say, the Linux Foundation has a plan. You're bringing together a bunch of tech leaders and saying, gee, what are we going to do about this? We have a plan. We collectively as OpenSSF, and we have groups dedicated to working on these tool sets. So that really has been the intended follow-on to that mobilization plan. Whether those streams are organically built or we go back to seek more audiences with what we can do and create and foster participation, it ain't for me to necessarily do. But that was the groundwork and the impetus around what we did last year.
A shameless plug, I am doing a session at OpenSSF Day in Vancouver about the mobilization plan and the current efforts, and kind of summarize. I've talked to each of the group leads of all the active efforts. So if you're curious to see what's going on with the mobilization plan, come to my session.
Hey, put that in the chat, Crow.
I will.
Okay.
So Crow, would it be safe to say that the mobilization plan is still moving forward somewhat?
I believe that Jeffrey may be leading the efforts to help with a refresh of the writing. Is that correct, Jeffrey? I sure am, Crow. All right, that sounds great. There is a group that will be assembling soon to help do a one-year refresh and update of the document. And that's where groups like the Education SIG and the OSS CERT SIG, they've taken the original plan and rewritten it. And that would be potentially part of the artifact update, would be incorporating that new knowledge we've learned over the last year.
Fair. The story safety one.
Are there any end users a part of that effort?
The mobilization plan rewrite?
Yeah.
I don't know. I had to ask to be invited to it, even though I wrote like a quarter of it, the whole plan.
It would be a shame and a little bit par for the course if they aren't. If an actual end user is not a part of that plan.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree, sir.
Yeah, I guess everybody knows one of the founding stimuli for the formation of this group was the absence of end user representation on the TAC, and the sense that it was a very vendor heavy organization, and I guess that's still slightly the case.
Yeah, I don't think it's past tense there. So.
No, unfortunately. But you know that all things change in time, I hope. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left. I think that was a very productive discussion. Thank you, Craig, for bringing that up. I'm curious if folks have any other issues they'd like to discuss before we tie up for the day. I'll take that silence as meaningful, except Dan has snuck in under the wire. Dan?
I broke the silence. There was a point raised in the chat about the possibility of a webinar around the CRA, and I just thought I wanted to seize on that. If as somebody who's based in the UK, so I don't know whether I care about the EU, but you know, there's somebody who's closer to the EU. I think it would be good to do that, and if there's some way we can set that up, that would be great.
I think it would be useful for definitely for folks who have government affairs or lobbying type organizations in their organization to get briefed on the open source implications. As I said, at least from what I've seen, the focus has been on other areas, both as individual end user and in terms of working together in collective lobbying groups. The focus has been elsewhere. I have to be vague, but it has been elsewhere. So basically, if there was a webinar or webinar series that I could, invite my government affairs folks to, that sort of like had a credible authority briefing them on the implications for open source and for company production in the worst possible scenario where we get production interruptions, would be useful to convey.
I would strongly suggest we don't try and do anything ourselves and funnel people towards the Linux Foundation Europe. We're mobilizing like folks to.
Oh, good. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I can put the link. I put the link in the chat earlier. I can put it in again. I can't edit the doc, unfortunately.
Oh, all right.
That's more to do with my system than anything to do with the doc. But, yeah, I dropped a link in the chat to the Linux Foundation Europe's CRA call to action page.
But is there any activity, or is there any kind of webinar or anything like that that's planned as part of that part of that activity, or are they just looking for feedback right now?
I mean, I think it's reasonable to. I don't know. Is the honest answer. I saw a panel at KubeCon Europe last week. That's the only reason I'm aware of it. But I think if you are saying that a webinar would be useful, that's good feedback for the LF Europe folks, right? They're looking to instigate change in this area, and that's their remit as the European Linux Foundation.
Yeah, so I'm happy to bring it up. Gab who leads LF Europe, is also part-time still executive director for Finos. I'm on the board of Finos. I can bring it up with him. I think it's a good idea. I think, Jacques, to your one thing you mentioned earlier is a credible authority that all of our public policy folks would see a name, a title, a role, and go, oh yeah, I should be on that call.
Yeah, because I'm just an engineer. What do I know? I mean, the fact that I studied law, it doesn't appear next to me. So, when I get paranoid about legal documents, that's the thing. But yeah, I think having external credibility will help convey the sort of the gravity of the situation. But I've cut off Krob.
No, I was circling back about the lack of representation from the end user community. Jonathan Meadows strongly asked me to participate as part of this group, which I'm very glad to, because a large part of my career has been as an enterprise defender for a long time. So if anyone here has anything they would like to pass along to either the TAC or the GB, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can help be your voice, even though you may not have a seat. I'm glad to help represent this community. So if there are things you want or you want to share up, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm glad to help broker that conversation and get you into the room if you would desire.
I think that's very helpful. Always helpful to have someone in the room. One thing I learned in my days of student politics, that a surprising amount of the world is run by people who just showed up. All right, so we got 5 minutes to go. Let's see if anyone else can sneak under the wire. Going once, going twice. Sold to the man with the funny hat. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I think it's been a very productive session. Yes, it does sound like people who do open source, Joshua. And we will see you all again in 2 weeks, I think.
Thanks for being a great host.
Oh, well, thank you. Of course, we all missed Jonathan today. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you again soon.